Okay, good morning. Good morning. The tradition and innovation walk into a bar, and the only thing I hope is that the punchline's clean. Yeah.
Be careful.
Yeah. Okay. My name is David Passmore. I'm a professor in the College of Education. It's my luck to tell you who's going to be speaking with you today. I'll kind of run through folks. Chris Gamrat is an instructional designer with the Online Learning Design and Innovation Office in the College of Information Sciences and Technology. Wave at the crew. And a lot of these are well-known characters around the universities, so they won't need a lot of introduction. Bart Pursel is the Faculty Programs Coordinator with Education Technology Services and co-director of the Center for Online Innovation and Learning. Kyle Peck, man with a beard, is Professor of Education at Penn State University and co-director of the Center for Online Innovation and Learning, which is also called COIL. Pat Shope is Prior Learning Assessment Coordinator for Penn State. Hi, Pat. Okay, so Kyle, rock and roll.
Okay, great. So I'm going to kick things up. We are, just so you know the agenda, we're going to wrap our part up in 25 minutes, and we'll have 22 minutes to talk as a group. So we want to make sure that happens, so we're just going to jump right into it. I'm going to start with this little video.
Because of our traditions, we've kept our balance for many, many years. We have traditions for everything. How to eat, how to sleep, how to wear clothes. You may ask, how did this tradition start? I'll tell you. I don't know. But it's a tradition.
Where can we get that?
I'm still working on copyright. I figured since it's just us, I could get away with this today. I have asked the library to help me figure out how to get copyright for anyway. No time for all that. So this is an amazing time right now. There's a lot going on. And we find ourselves at this moment where tradition and innovation are, in conflict. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some of the things that are going on and sort of try and wrap our heads around what kinds of traditions are in the way, what kinds of traditions we might need to carry forward. And that's what it is. A lot going on, and not just the MOOCs and badges and things you'll hear about, but things like online shopping. People are used to getting what they want when they want it. Now, personalized if they want it. And having good information about what they're buying and. And the kinds of choices we have outside school is going to influence what people will buy. Our life as a university is changing. So on our agenda, we're going to talk about three, quickly, 5 minutes each. We're going to talk about MOOCs, massive open online courses. We're going to talk about digital badges. We're going to talk about prior learning assessment. We're going to bring it back around. How can we make all these things work in an institution that is maybe even the epitome of tradition, right? So, tradition meets innovation. So I'm going to turn it over first to Bart for status on our MOOC activities and update there.
Come over here and borrow that remote from
Yeah,
you.
just a downward pull advances slides, upwards goes backwards.
Okay, thanks Kyle. So my name is Bart Pursel. I'm kind of unofficially the MOOC data steward here at Penn State. So I work with Coursera on all the different data they send us, and I tell people, I'm swimming in MOOC data. Drowning might be a better term because they send us a lot of stuff, and it takes a lot of time to kind of try and go through everything, figure out what we have, what else do we need to collect to make sense of the data. So some of the things I want to talk about today are what we get and some of the things that we're just starting to poke around with and learn from some of the MOOC stuff. So as most of you probably know, we have 5 MOOCs under our belt now. So these are the 5 different MOOCs that we offered. The Energy MOOC just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. So usually what happens after these things are done is we ask Coursera for some information. So what Coursera sends our direction, they send kind of a rolled up list of demographics. So they send us all the information on people's ages, our students' ages in our MOOCs, where they come from, whether they're a native English speaker or not, whether they're employed full-time or not, the industry that they're employed in, things along those lines. Now, as you can imagine, if you've ever signed up for Coursera or most websites, you really only have to create a username and password to kind of get into the service. So a lot of people don't answer this. So we only have about 20–25% of the information of our enrolled students in our MOOCs in terms of the demographic data. We ask some things as well. We have a Penn State kind of pre-course and post-course survey that we ask the students, but I don't want to talk too much about that today. The big two are this course database and the Clickstream data. So I want to just jump into those two specifically and talk a little bit about what they give us from Coursera's side and what we're trying to kind of do with some of this information. So the course database powers the Coursera platform. So it's not necessarily a nice, clean database meant for research. It's a really big, ugly database that's meant to power the Coursera system. You can kind of think of this, at the end of the semester, if they kind of wrapped up all the Angel databases and just kind of sent that to you with no documentation and no support and no help. So it gets a little hard to work with at first, but luckily there are other Coursera partners in the same boat we're in that are kind of getting together and helping kind of sort through these things. So this database captures almost all the interactions students have with the course. So whether or not a student took the quiz and the quiz grade, whether or not a student did a project and what the peer assessment scores were on the project, all of the forum interactions that students had and when those interactions took place, what videos students are watching. This is all in this really big, giant database. And it's big, right? Again, this is meant to power software, and one of the problems we're having now is we have a lot of really interested faculty members and researchers that want to dig into this database, but a lot of them aren't quite sure how to wrestle with something like this. So right now we're kind of trying to put a process and procedure in place to allow a little bit of an easier data extraction method and work with faculty that want to explore interesting questions of the data and try and get them the data they need for analysis. And then there's also this Clickstream data, which if you thought the last was bad, this one's really worse. This is just a giant text file that has every interaction a student made in the course in the form of page views. So when they log into the course, what sequence of pages did they click on? So how did they navigate around when they were in the course? As well as video player interactions. So when did they pause? When did they hit play? When did they fast forward? When did they rewind? Things like that. And it looks beautiful. So this is one record of the Clickstream data, right? This is a JSON object that has a bunch of different pieces of information in it. In the art course, for example, there are 5 million of these, and it's about a 7.5 gig text file. My computer can't even process it. That's the first time I've ever ran into computational power trying to look at data before. But that's kind of the things that we're trying to wrestle with now. So some of the things that we're doing with the course database, I usually try and avoid talking about completion percentages. I don't think that's a very valuable metric in MOOCs. So we go in, and one of the things we try and do is try and figure out more what I would call engagement metrics. So how are people coming in and interacting with the course? So what this is, here on the y-axis, that's students, so number of students. Down here, these are days. The course was about 7 weeks. This is from the art course. And we have these categories split up by completion status. So the blue bar represents people that did not complete the art course. The red bar represents normal completion. In this course, that meant that they mastered the quizzes. And the green bar, completion with distinction, and that means they mastered the quizzes and did some unique art assignments that were peer assessed. So right away, you can see in the blue bar, there are a lot of people that start and dive out, after the first 2 weeks or so. But way out here on the right, there are a heck of a lot of people that aren't completing, that don't show up in the completion percentage, that I would argue are having a highly successful, engaged learning experience because they're in there for the whole duration of the course. So I think a lot of those folks don't really get reported on in any meaningful way in any numbers and things like that. So it's one of the reasons we try and stay away from completion percentages. So this is a similar graph, but right now we're looking at video habits. So on the y-axis, right now we're looking at video views, and we're looking out here on the x-axis over time in terms of weeks. So over the 7-week course, as well as some data after the course kind of closed, what do people do in terms of video watching? And you can see, again, these non-completers, right? Even at the end of the course and even after the course ends, they're registering about 40,000 video views a week. Pretty staggering information. We're trying to figure out how do we kind of talk about these students that are having really interesting, engaged, I would argue probably powerful learning experiences, but they never really get reported on. We're just starting to experiment to try and learn more about this group of people. And we know about 10% is the completion rate, 5 to 10%. But if we look at people that I would call engaged, we think it's closer to about 30 or 40%. And the signature track, which ran in the creativity course, this is where people kick in a little bit of money. I think it's about 40 bucks. 98% of those people finished. So as soon as people put some skin in the game, completion goes radically up. So if we take what we know about that and we apply it to something like the digital arts certificate, right? What if we were able to give, credit, 1 or 2 credits, talk about tradition. I don't know how we're going to do this. It's not traditional in any sense, and there are a lot of things we have to figure out in order to do this. But what if you gave 1 credit for people that completed our MOOC on art and said, hey, you now have 1 credit towards your 15-credit art certificate program, right? Now they have some skin in the game. We're giving them 1 credit towards this end goal. Would this lead to bigger conversions? It's one of the things we're trying to do, but again, the tradition and the policies in place make some of this work a little more challenging. Last thing, with the Clickstream data, we just started to figure out ways to look at the Clickstream data to understand each week of the people that start a video, how many actually finish it, how many watch it to completion. So we did that for the videos in each week. We kind of rolled up the videos by week. And so in the first week, 22% of the students that started a video finished the video. So you could kind of make some sense, right? Early in the MOOC, not a lot of people are really in there very serious. They're kind of shopping around, poking around. And you see down here, it starts to get a little bit higher, up to about 60%. The highest video had a 80% completion, and that was a 9-second video. So 9 seconds was too long for 20% of the people to watch the whole thing. So there's really strange things we're finding out here. Whoops. And one of the things we're trying to do with some of the Clickstream data is figure out the age-old question, right? Can you identify the ideal length of an instructional video? Does it change over disciplines? Can you identify the ideal number of videos per module? The other thing that we're really trying to look at now, because we know when people are skipping forwards and backwards, is can you identify kind of pain points in videos? And based on what you might call those pain points, because we know some demographic information and so on about these folks, can we figure out if it's a language barrier? Can we figure out if it's a conceptual barrier, the content's too difficult? Can we figure out if the content's just not clear? Because we can see that, a certain number of people that are hitting this have a bachelor's degree or higher. So there's a lot of stuff we're exploring here and trying to figure out that we hope might give us a better understanding of the MOOC experience, and most importantly, how we can kind of reapply that at Penn State, both in World Campus and residence, to kind of get out of the tradition a little bit and do some new things. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Surprise! So what's the button to
Okay,
advance?
you pull down on that side button to go forward and up to go back. Just the
Okay.
side button over here.
Oh, that one?
one over here.
Okay. Maybe I'll just use a keyboard.
Yeah, you can do
All
that.
right.
Arrow keys right and left.
Yeah, great. So, I'm talking about digital badging today. That's something that we're starting to look at a lot at Penn State. I'm working on a COIL grant. So we had a poster session earlier today. Short plug, there'll be another session later on talking about a specific application of badging Penn State at the university library system. So I encourage you to attend. I think it'll be good. I'll be there. So digital badging, what is it in general? So badges represent this opportunity to credential and demonstrate learning experiences. So this is acquisition of knowledge, skills, abilities, competencies, and landmarks. So landmarks are kind of like, those big things that you get to the end of the year. You get a diploma, you get a certificate for participation or something like that. So there are a lot of different reasons that you could be using digital badging. So, and there are also some questions into motivation. So we're starting to look at kind of what are those things, what are reasons that we want to offer digital badges? And those are, while it's still something very new, and I'll talk a little bit more about how new it is in the slide to come, we're already starting to see just the first couple of peer-reviewed papers, which is really exciting because I plan on writing my dissertation on this, and it's hard to write a dissertation without any papers to cite. So inside of badging, so there are these other things that are similar to badges, but I think badges for the win. So degrees and transcripts, they're very clouded. There's not much information in terms of what there is. There are a lot of questions here. Who assessed it? Who was teaching it? How rigorous was it? I have another slide that I often use that has my transcript from the fall of 2012. And I have a class that's Ed Eval Prague. So that's it, and an A. Okay, so we know that I took
Sure,
an
sure
education
you got
class, and I did well. That's all the information that you get from what Penn State offers as the most information. So those are transcripts. That's the most information. Degrees says Penn State, hey, you know something, and Penn State has some weight to it, so maybe you know a lot. And then there's e-portfolios. So there's a really nice thing about e-portfolios is that there's a lot of transparency to the learning. You can see exactly what I produced that says I know this subject, I can do these things, I have these skills. But there's a disadvantage to it because it's really learn and maintained. So I can modify things later on. I can claim work that isn't mine. If nobody's really monitoring it, I could potentially do that. So that's a little bit of a danger, and I think badging really adds a nice benefit to it where you're able to have somebody certifying and saying, yes, Chris knows this, Bart knows this, Kyle knows this. They're backing up that claim, that evidence, and saying, that's good enough for me. That's what we're looking for. This is what's meaningful in this subject. And I think that badges start to fill in that space where you're starting to really understand and get a good sense of what a learning experience was like. So then when you're coming to a job or you're applying to grad school and you say, this is why I'm a great applicant. So there's a growing interest in digital badging. And I don't know if this has a laser pointer, I'm not going to use it. I brought my own. So this is I pulled this from Google Trends. So it's 2011. This chart was actually a lot longer going out that way, but there's nothing there. Nobody was talking about digital badges before early 2011, and it's really started to spike. People were really thinking about how can we demonstrate these skills and experiences? How can we say, Penn State's great, it's great to be here. What does that mean? If you didn't go to Penn State, you don't have any friends that went to Penn State, you have a vague idea of what it's like here, but you're not really able to capture that. Like as one of the examples we've been talking about is students that work on Thon. So people who are involved in Thon see and know all that there is to that sort of experience. When they go to another employer or they go to another country, there's no recognition there. And it's really hard to explain what Thon is and all the stuff that goes into it in a sentence or two when you're at an interview. So I think that looking at that is going to start to become really important. There are also a lot of people, this is all within the past year and a half. So the MacArthur Foundation and Mozilla and others are working on building an open badging platform, and that's something that's really gained a lot of interest. There are groups all across the country. 2 years ago, there was a huge number of grants. There was 30-some grants funding the building of good digital badging platforms. Right now, all that information has been collected, surveys were given to the folks that built the badging platforms, built the badges, implemented it, and a researcher named Dan Hickey at Indiana University has already started to digest that information and start to put out a document. It's like a preliminary or beta sort of document, but it's saying, hey, here are design principles you might want to consider when you're starting to make your own badges. And so that's already underway. In addition to that, there is UC Davis is starting to implement a program that's basically badging in an agricultural program they have. The University of Wisconsin is offering this flexible degree option where you can work on things over time and start to, they don't say it's badging, but it's pretty much badging. The other things that are popping up, the Credit Trust is relatively new. This is a third-party organization. So they're not making badges, they're like the bank of badges. They're monitoring interactions and exchanges and making sure that things are valid. So badges haven't expired. Badges are good from somebody. And I say that I got a badge from Penn State. It actually is a badge from Penn State. It's not one that I just made up. And the other thing that's really just popped up very recently is this idea of the badge alliance. So there's starting to become this recognition. Mozilla and others are saying there's becoming a ton of people looking at badges. We should have a group where we can get together, develop a task force, develop working communities, and start to be thinking about these in all these different subjects. Rather than, right now they have like every Thursday or Wednesday they have a meeting where they talk about 1 or 2 subjects. Getting to the point where they're spreading this out and really talking about what do we need to think about in terms of standards? What do we need to think about in terms of research? How can we implement these? And what are best practices? These are a lot of things that are starting to come along in badging. I'm going to pass that off to Pat.
Thank you. Great. Pat Shope on prior learning assessment. Do you have the clicker?
It's on the table.
You can use the right arrow or just the clicker there.
Okay. So the question is prior learning assessment innovation or tradition?
Yeah, good question.
It is tradition. We have been doing prior learning assessment here at Penn State for longer than you all have been here. Not collectively, but there's no individual in this room that predates that. So prior learning assessment is part of our tradition. We have had it for a long time. Here's what it means. The evaluation and assessment of an individual's learning for college credit, certification, or advanced standing towards further education or training. In other words, every time we recognize someone's prior learning, whether that learning occurred in another college or university, whether that occurred in the workplace, whether that occurred in independent learning, we are accepting prior learning. What's the lowest hanging fruit in prior learning? Transfer credits. Every time we accept credits from somewhere else, we have accepted someone's prior learning. So it's not new. In fact, it's been around for a while. It may be acquired through work, corporate training, military service, independent study. So we've got a lot of different options. Pay attention to that independent study. That's coming back in a moment. In order to be considered credit-worthy, the learning must be college level. And that's extremely important to understand what prior learning is and isn't. You will find a lot of folks who will call it's that credit for work experience thing. No, it is not. Work experience is very valuable, but that's not necessarily credit worthy. You will hear other institutions or people or articles refer to it as credit for life experience. I've got a lot of life experience, but it's not necessarily credit worthy. So it's college level. Now that makes the waters really muddy because we first have to understand what college level is, and no one can really define that. Even CALE, which is where these standards come from in this definition, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, if you say, what do you mean by college level, they will say it's whatever the college says it is. Okay, so that's about as clear as mud, but that's okay, we're going to move on. It includes both theoretical and applied knowledge. That's also important because others will say, is that credit for skills? No, not necessarily, but it could include skills. It's what you can do, and you usually have to have a knowledge base behind it. So when we capture prior learning, we're capturing knowledge, skills, what you know, what you can do. Here's a magic word for you that is not innovative, it's traditional, but it's getting new life, competencies. It's competence. It's what can you do, okay? And if we can measure that, truly, it doesn't matter where it came from, does it? Whether I learned it in a class yesterday or I learned it last year as a result of training in my workplace, not the work I did, but training, it really doesn't matter. It takes that place and that time out of the equation. So imagine that. Our tradition has been innovative for a long time. So it's based on agreed upon learning outcomes. And see, that's where we can start to make it clear. What are our outcomes? What do we mean by that? Well, in this setting, if I want to find outcomes for each credit course, I should be able to go to a syllabus and look and see. As a result of taking this course, when I'm done, I should know, I should be able to, those are learning outcomes. Once we agree once we have that standard in place, I can bring an adult, usually an adult, now it's getting muddier, any student up to that and say, if you are already competent in that, we'll measure that and you get to move on, okay? So that's what it is. This is what it looks like. Now there's another new innovative word out there called unbundling. Well, let's first look at what we mean by bundling. Bundling is the very top. So we have 3 areas here that we consider. Knowledge or learning or transfer of learning, however you want to term that, but the teaching that we do to result in knowledge, the first part. We do that by offering a course or a workshop. Then we assess it, an exam or project or some hybrid or some iteration that's similar to that. And then finally, you get a credential, credit or certificate. Bundling means that's all under the purview of one faculty or one department. It's bundled together. If I teach the course, I get to assess you, and then I determine whether you get the credential or the credits. Unbundling means that a piece of that, any piece of that, could happen elsewhere, not within my control. We have unbundled the process. Well, we unbundled things a long time ago. When we first took transfer credits, it was unbundled. But basically then, we're saying the knowledge could come from an accredited school, from high school, advanced placement exams, from military training, from industry training. If it is an accredited school, we have a transcript in lieu of assessment, that counts. We have AP exams in lieu of assessment. We have CLEP and DSST exams that students can take even before they come, and they can say, here, I am competent in economics, I don't need to take the course, and we say, we'll accept that. The American Council on Education is a third party that does some of this validation. They do military and industry. In other words, they take teams of faculty in to review. They make a recommendation on its creditworthiness, and Penn State, as well as every other institution, says, will we accept or not accept that? So there are lists, so we can go and find and see what we accept. And then finally, credit by exam and credit by portfolio are our internal mechanisms to assess. In other words, if you present knowledge to us and there's not one of those other ways to capture it, we've got our own internal. So we've been doing this a long time. The issue is, do we do enough of it? No. What we do, is it scalable for this brave new world that we're entering? No, but that's an argument for another day. But right now, let me add the innovation. That's where MOOCs and badges would fit. To us, in prior learning assessment, MOOCs are another way for a student to acquire knowledge, okay? I'm not concerned about the peer assessments and whether they're good or not. I leave that to the other folks, because right now, you can't bring a MOOC into me for credit, but you can bring the knowledge that you would gain in a MOOC, and I could find an appropriate assessment if it's no more than credit by exam or credit by portfolio to measure your knowledge, and then we can bring it in. So there is innovation out there that comes through tradition. Badges the same way. I am very excited about badges as a way to micro-credential. So that if you don't have 3 credits worth of knowledge, right now we have to say, sorry for your luck, you've got to take the course. Time and money will have to be put forward for you to get the piece you don't know. Micro-credentialing would allow us in the future to give credit for the competence you have, and then we'll find other ways to offer what you need. So, prior learning assessment is tradition, but it's how we can bring innovation in. So, what I want to leave you with, prior learning assessment is the gatekeeper. It comes through us. If it's coming in and going to be a part of our traditional credit system, which is the only system we have right now, it's got to come through prior learning assessment. We're that gatekeeper. On the outside, a lot of things are happening, some good, some not, but when it passes through the prior learning assessment gate, you can be assured that on the other side, you've got the same quality and rigor you either have had or you haven't had. It's all based on the assessment.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay. We are here, right? So I tried to find an image that sort of summarizes where we are, brings it all back together. So we're definitely, the leaders of institutions are on the lookout, and they're in a very precarious position. By the way, don't you love the way they use Photoshop to put binoculars in the guy's hand? No. Anyway, so we, it's a tough thing. We're writing this big, institution when all these options are available and people outside are much more nimble than we are. Wow, I showed this slide before. I don't think, based on everything, all the trends that are going on with cost of higher education, economic collapses in different parts of the world, access to technologies, the way people are doing online shopping, I don't think we're going to be able to sell these great big degrees 30 years from now. I think we may be able to sell degrees to people who accumulate the different kinds of evidence that a degree implies. And we may be able to lead people all the way through our own, but I don't think that's going to happen as much as it is now. I think MOOCs have definitely changed the way we think about education and where it can come from and who can get it. There have been some stunning facts that I don't have time to go in here about the way a Mongolian teenager can outperform the highest performer in Stanford's class and so on. But we need to act on these changes that we see. So we have been, the higher education institutions are among the most stable things in the world. Among the 50 longest lasting institutions, most of them are education institutions and the others are like religions. So we've been around forever, but that doesn't mean we're going to not go the way of the newspaper and the magazine and other things. We need to, I think, sell smaller units. I think and we need to give better information about those units, and we need to define them well and measure them well. And we need to understand that it's not really about us delivering the content. What our job is going to be. We're no longer in the content delivery business, I think. I think we're more and more in the providing support and learning communities for people as they learn things, and then do a really good job of assessment and a really good job of certification, so that when somebody gets a certificate from Penn State, it means what it says it means. And I think if we don't do that, others quickly will. Some institutions in higher ed are already moving faster than we are. That's okay. As a dear friend of mine who will remain nameless once said, Penn State doesn't like to lead, but we don't like to be far behind. So we're in kind of a safe position. We're not out there on the very edge, but we're not very far behind. I think that's a good place, but we need to keep moving. So it's going to be about learning communities. How can we make coming to Penn State value added to you in an age where the content is out there? And then about quality of our assessments and so on, and creating efficiencies. Right now, the system is incredibly inefficient. We don't have time to go into that. We could do a whole conference on redundancies and how things are out there. So what we need to do is bring all this stuff together. Bring the opportunities for people to learn things on their own, together with high-quality assessments, together with traditions. I'm not saying we get rid of all traditions, but I'm saying several of them are definitely in the way. So there are lots of possible answers to how we bring all these things together. Here's one. It starts with thinking about the different kinds of learning outcomes. Outcomes are different, and some things can be done easily by people on their own and with peer support, and other things require expert guidance and expert evaluation. So we need to acknowledge that and understand that in a typical advanced course, there's a lot of different kinds of elements in there. But in basic courses, it's mostly lower level things. And I have one little application at the end. I've been told I've been too harsh. There's really maybe a lot more application through there. I understand that. It's complicated animation. I didn't have time to fix it for this one. And then for a very advanced course, it's almost all higher level stuff. And the only time you dip back into the low levels, you're usually doing it on your own. A committee member says, go back and add this to your thing, and you do it on your own. You learn new things all on your own. Anyway, these ideas can be translated into a system to bring everything back together. If we think of courses not as one big thing that is, a 15-week-long set of things, but a series of badgeable chunks that mean things. I'm not saying every week is a badge. I'm saying, if you're learning about item analysis, that could be a badge. If you're learning about the phenomenology and qualitative research, that could be a badge. So you take the things in chunks that make sense, and you identify courses based on what they do. You put those in a sequence, and you do that not just for the introductory courses, but for advanced courses as well. Not so much because people can do that on their own, but because you need, those are certifications. If somebody leaves a program early, mother gets sick, whatever, they have credentials, less than the degree, that show that they've got capabilities. I'm proposing we put all those badgeable chunks into a content pool. Think of it as sort of a flex MOOC, right? Open educational resources. Publish them out there and let people learn from them. Let people who can't afford to come to us learn things that they can learn on their own. Let them create a personalized learning plan that lets them choose the things that are personally relevant to them and work on those things. Some of those things are basic, low level on the hierarchy things, and those can be tested mechanically. And if they pass the test, it results in a badge. Other things are higher level things, and those should be peer reviewed if they're doing it for free. We can't engage. If we need to be paid, we need to make a living, and we can work with people who can afford that. But let's start with this free level where you take things, if you don't pass the test, it's no big deal. You take the test again, you pass it the second time, you get your badge. Again, you could go back, there could be different ways to learn things out there in the content pool. So testing of things that aren't, if you get down here and you fail a peer review, that would mean you're going to end up owing more peer reviews, right? Usually you get reviewed by 3 people, you review 3 other people. Well, if you fail it, you now owe 6 reviews. And then before you get your badge, you have to actually do those reviews to pay the freight so that you can get a badge through this peer review system. So that people can go round and round out there. The world can be a better place learning important things from us without our involvement, really, once we put these things out there. But there's also the possibility to take these badges in an online digital portfolio, put them in collections, and then ask for credit for those. So you learn this on your own. So now it's prior learning. Right, we put our stuff out there, but now people have learned things that aren't credit worthy. How do we know they're credit worthy? They were chunks of our courses. We knew they were chunks of our courses when we put them out there. So they can produce a report from this online portfolio that says, here's a chunk I would like credit for. Now that comes in 2 flavors. There's prior learning assessment towards continuing education units, which can be, it's mostly hours in seat time, and it's not really about proficiency and competence. They could pay us a small fee and we could issue CEUs. More often though, they're going to say, I have the equivalent of a course. Or I hope I have the equivalent of parts of a course. So right now I'm not even asking us to give up the course. I will be very soon asking us to give up the course or to have courses that are parts. And instead of saying, oh, sorry, you're missing 2 of these 10 things, you have to take the course. Say, you're missing 2 of the 10 things, you have to pass the 2 of the 10 things. And maybe it doesn't take you 15 weeks to do it and so on. But anyway, that's the equivalent of that course. So why not go for credit by examination for the knowledge level stuff and credit by portfolio for the higher level stuff? If you don't pass the exam, no big deal. Study, learn it in another way, try it again. And then for the portfolio review, I think since this is serious stuff and we care about this, first of all, one of the big problems is gone. In the portfolio reviews, they usually aren't giving you the portfolio you wanted. They're saying, here's my portfolio. Yeah, but we usually look for this kind of a drawing and we want this kind of a... And this way they're giving you, because they did your badges, they're giving you the outputs that you want. And they've already been peer reviewed, right? So by the time it gets to us, chances are really good that what they're giving us won't require a whole lot of energy. And by the way, I see the portfolio reviews as a way to fund doctoral students, graduate students, reviewing the work of people in undergraduate programs. So it's a potential revenue source there. So if they pass that, great, they get credits for their transcript, and then having those credits, as the previous session pointed out, means now the obstacle, the distance to my completion has been reduced. The cost, instead of a 10-course master's degree, maybe I get the equivalent of 2 or 3 courses done. And they know Penn State, and they know about our master's degree, and they're more likely to come here. So that's one way we might bring it all together. So the key components are all there. I don't have time to go into this. Not really prior learning assessment all the time. Sometimes they learn it in order to be assessed to get that credential. The peer review and support tools are going to be, I think what's going to happen is people are going to be nomads, but not nomads like nomads, nomads. People gathering credentials from different places. And right now it's really hard and will only take 3 credits or 9 credits on your way into a degree. That's going to change, and people are going to build digital representations of themselves with credentials that come from a lot of different places. Carnegie Unit is one of these traditions. It was developed in 1906. That's when airplanes could fly about as high as this room and about twice as far as this room. And that's when the San Francisco earthquake caused the fire department to basically destroy the city because they were using dynamite, a new technique to handle fires. Right? This is the age in which this wisdom that we're operating in. And by the way, it didn't catch on until they were trying to figure out how to count time towards retirement for faculty members. It wasn't really designed as a unit of learning. I mean, it was, they said this is how many hours and so on, but it didn't really catch until Andrew Carnegie was trying to get professors who were paid so poorly, they couldn't afford to retire, a way to, create a retirement system based on how long they had worked. So anyway, it wasn't even developed for what it's used for. So that's tradition. So we titled this session, Tradition and Innovation Walk into a Bar, because I offered the presenters 4 titles, this one as a joke, and I think as a challenge to me. They said, hey, we like that. But also because it really juxtaposes, these jokes kind of juxtapose weird things, and then interesting or fun things happen. Well, we are in a time of that juxtaposition right now. And fun things are going to happen. But I did find one good metaphor. I think, again, they challenged me to use that one. I'm tying it together. So the metaphor is, there is another joke. But this time I'm going to say a man runs into, and it's not quite a bar, it's a saloon, back in the Wild West days. He runs in, this is the kind of scene that's there, and he says, Big John's coming, and poof, everybody disappears. So the bartender's back there shaking behind the bar. And then this big rumbling starts, and dust kicks up in the street. The guy rides up on a bull, and he hops off this bull, and he just bats the bull in the head, Alex Karras style in Blazing Saddles. The bull falls to the ground. He walks inside, give me a drink. Gives him a drink. Give me a drink. Gives him another drink. And then he stops, and the bartender says, you want another one? He says, heck no, Big John's coming. So my point is, this stuff, all this stuff we talked about, that might not even be Big John. Right? This is the beginning. We're on this J-curve, and there's a rapid acceleration of new things that are going to influence learning. So we need to get agile. We need to start, looking at new ways to operate. So thank you very much. We still have a few minutes for questions and discussion.
Okay, let's try it out. We have till 11:45. Questions? Fire. Come on, there we go.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Kyle's remarks. But I wonder, when you talk about the agility or the particular attitude towards agility at Penn State, whether what we should be doing is trying to get another university to adopt these ideas so that we could follow closely.
Well, so University of Wisconsin and University of Northern Arizona are actually out there a couple jumps ahead of us in terms of their personalized learning at Northern Arizona University, 5 bachelor's degrees, and their flex degrees at Wisconsin. So there are a few out there. What's happening? So Michael Horn came to the Blue-White Vision Council thing last summer, and he said basically what universities need to do is set up this skunk works that is free of all the red tape and bureaucracy that holds universities in place and so on. Well, what is happening is not that. They're not saying, like Apple did, go make the Macintosh. They're saying, hey, we have this outreach unit. And outreach and extension, they kind of play by different rules. We have World Campus, by the way. World Campus is kind of a separate unit that has not all different rules, but they have, it's sort of a different, safer place where voluntary programs can do interesting things, I believe. So I think that in both those cases, at Wisconsin and Northern Arizona University, it is in outreach and extension where exciting things are happening. They're kind of using those as these skunk works. And I'd like to see that start happening here.
Okay, let's go one more here.
This seems to be going against where we're heading in some ways at Penn State with the gen ed movement towards these themes. And so to me, the badges are a nice idea, but how do you have integrative thinking and, instead of these individual little badges, and I'm not against the badges, but it's more of a, I'm thinking about, I want students to get the bigger picture, and I want to have them, what I feel like they get in my classes, either online or in person, I'd like to think it's a bigger picture, not just this, okay, I took this quiz, I took that quiz.
Quick one.
So I
Quick
think
answer.
there are 2 ways that you can look at that. And, one is actually badging courses. Students already get transcripts, which is a representation of the knowledge and experiences they gain as students. I'm thinking that maybe the first place to look at badging is the stuff that students are already doing, the great experiences they're getting that don't go on transcripts, that are hard to explain to employers, and looking at those first, because they need to be represented, and students maybe aren't as eloquent at writing it down or describing it as the entire university thinking about that and really representing what's meaningful about those sort of experiences.
So what's happening at Deakin University, and what I would love to see happen here, is they sort of redefine Gen Ed as the outcomes. And we're doing that now, in the process of doing that with Engaged Scholarship at Penn State. What is it people are supposed to take away from these experiences? So things like systems thinking, multicultural awareness, critical thinking. Now, how do you actually implement that? You don't need like just one systems thinking badge. You end up with an array of badges that are all about systems thinking that were collected from different, maybe you did an Engaged Scholarship project that cleaned up a water system and you had to use systems thinking for that. And then maybe you had an economics class where there was a thing that had systems thinking. So you end up with the things you care about and an array of badges that come from different places during the experience. Integration, you know, sometimes the word, does it add up? First of all, I would say, I'm not sure it adds up now, but I'm not going to try and go there. I'm not going to say, because you don't do it, we don't have to do it. I'm going to say, if you want integration, you create another activity or badge that requires synthesis or integration. And it's a high-level thing that somebody monitors and awards when the integration has happened.
Let's say thank you.